Let's get started. Uh, Leading our webinar today are Dr. Evelyn Johnson and Jenna Robitaille. Evelyn is our VP of Research and Development and Professor Emeritus at Boise State University. She's also a co-author of the DESA Middle School Student Self-Report and of the DESA 2, which is coming this back to school. Jen is our Director of Research and Development and co-author of the DESA assessments and the lead author of our adult SEL program, EdCert. So welcome, Evelyn and Jen.
Thank you, Laura. We are excited to be here with you all and spend the next hour or so with you. So I'm going to kick us off for today, and I'll start by covering the goals for our session and our time together today. So first, we will define a dual factor risk and resilience framework. We'll then discuss how this framework can be used to help schools promote student well-being. As part of this, we'll talk about collecting data, both risk and resilience assessment data, and then talk about how that data can be used to support students. Lastly, we'll share concrete recommendations for developing resilience factors in students with both foundational practices and strategies that can be used in the classroom. Let's go ahead and get started. So we wanted to first set the stage and the context for our conversation today and talk a little bit about why we should focus on student well-being. So if you attended the first session in this series earlier this month, you may have heard Lisa share some of these statistics with you. We felt important to reiterate some of them. So on the left, I'll start there. You'll see a number of statistics from the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Report, which highlight something that we all know very well, which is that students are struggling with their mental health. The number of adolescents who report more poor mental health have been on the rise and have been increasing over the last decade. And we also know that mental health concerns lead to a lot of struggles for students, struggles with school, struggles making good decisions, as well as struggles with overall health. And these concerns are often coupled with increased substance abuse, as well as other high-risk behaviors. And then at the same time, we also know that our nation is seeing shortages of mental health professionals in school settings. So the national ratio of school psychologists as well as school counselors to students is well above the recommended ratio. So although there are mental well-being interventions in schools that are effective, many students do not actually have access to these important interventions and supports and are not receiving the treatments that they need. The good news, however, is that most schools, approximately 90% of schools, report that they are actively supporting and developing students' social and emotional skills. This is really important because research has consistently demonstrated that social and emotional skills are associated with improved well-being as well as reduced emotional and behavioral concerns. And these social and emotional programs, can promote well-being and promote resilience of students, as well as prevent later problems from occurring. So given these realities, the high prevalence of mental health concerns, which are coupled with decades-long shortages of mental health providers, suggests that we need a preventive universal approach to better support students. And schools are uniquely positioned to play a role in supporting students' well-being. And this is really going to be our focus for our time together in this session today. So when we talk about promoting students' well-being, that work is best done through a risk and resilience framework. And this framework, as the name implies, focuses on two factors. First is the development of resilience, or sometimes you might hear the term protective factors. And then second is on the early identification and prevention of risk factors. Years and years of research is available that has demonstrated that students who have well-developed resilience or protective factors are also much better able to navigate the challenges that they face. And they can respond and cope with those risk factors that arise throughout their lives. We're going to dig into both of these in a bit more detail on the next few slides. So when we talk about risk and resilience factors, we're typically thinking about them as being classified into three main categories: the environment, the family, and then within the individual themselves. So environmental factors are things like community systems, such as high quality schools. Family factors are obviously things within the family, such as having a supportive family or one consistent, stable caregiver in your life. And then within individual factors are those individual or personal attributes, things like having good overall health or having good problem-solving skills. To best support students' resilience and their well-being, we should be both building these resilience or protective factors, but also removing risk factors in students' lives across these three areas. However, because most of our work is in schools with educators, we primarily focus on identifying risk and resilience factors that educators can most affect. And these typically fall under that within individual category. So we know that most students will encounter challenges or risk factors at some point in their lives. However, by building students' protective factors, we can help them navigate these challenges successfully when they do come up. So this risk and resilience framework can really help us think about how we can provide that universal preventive support to all students, really because all students will benefit from having their resilience promoted. And those students who face more risk, we will obviously also require that more support in developing their resilience factors. And so we're really going to spend our time today digging into this risk and resilience framework and thinking about how it can be used to best support students' well-being. So this slide provides some examples of the key resilience factors that schools can promote, and that we'll really be focusing on today. We know that building these factors, things like having strong social and emotional skills, having healthy and positive relationships, having a sense of optimism, being engaged in learning, and then a connection and belonging, all of these factors play a really important role in helping students overcome adversity and actually to thrive. So we'll be talking about ways that schools can promote these factors later in this webinar. And then for the purposes of our webinar today, we'll be focusing on two main within individual risk factors. So the first are internalizing concerns. These are emotional and behavioral concerns that are expressed inwardly, such as feeling isolated, feeling withdrawn, and lonely. The second are externalizing concerns. These are emotional and behavioral concerns that are expressed outwardly, such as displaying aggression towards peers, showing impulsive behaviors, or regularly pushing boundaries and rules. Later in this webinar, we will talk about screening tools, or a screening tool that can be used to help identify students experiencing these internalizing and externalizing concerns.
So as Jen mentioned, the risk and resilience framework is more than a theory, right? There's a substantial and growing evidence base that really supports that when you screen for both risk and resilience factors, you're much better able to identify all of the students who need support to be successful. In the psychology literature, this framework is sometimes referred to as the dual factor approach or dual factor model to well-being. And what's really interesting is that across multiple studies using different measures, a consistent finding is that students will fall into one of four categories. So let's take a look at these categories one by one. On this table, what you see is that it shows a student's indication of risk or psychopathology in the psych research, right? So where this top row means that a student has a low level of risk and the bottom row means that they have higher levels of risk. The columns show a student's indication of resilience or well-being, where the left column indicates low levels of resilience and the right column indicates higher levels of resilience. Now, students in that lower left area that's shaded red, these are students who have both high levels of risk and low levels of resilience, right? In the research on the dual factor approach, they're typically referred to as troubled. And as you can see, that means that they lack protective factors or resilience. They struggle significantly with mental health challenges, and they report low levels of well-being. So the next category are students with lower levels of risk and low levels of resilience. Students in this category are referred to as vulnerable, and they tend to have some mental health challenges, but because they lack protective factors to help them navigate those challenges, they are at high risk for being overwhelmed, right? Vulnerable students are not thriving, and they tend to report lower levels of well-being. In the research around the dual factor approach, over time, students who fall into this category are very likely to end up being in the troubled category if they do not receive intervention and support. So next, we have students who have both high levels of risk, right? We're in that bottom right corner, and high levels of resilience. Again, in the dual factor model, these students are referred to as symptomatic but content. So they might struggle with anxiety, but because they have well-developed protective factors like a strong social network or some strategies to cope with that anxiety, they can effectively navigate challenges in healthy and productive ways. These students often, they tend to report higher levels of well-being. And then finally, we have students in that top right category, what's called complete mental health. And as you can see, these students have both strong protective factors and they experience few or limited mental health challenges. So as you can see by looking at that right column, students who have high levels of resilience report higher levels of well-being. And it's why developing resilience and not just mitigating risk is so important. It really underscores that the absence of challenges by itself does not equal positive well-being, right? Students need well-developed resilience or protective factors in order to thrive. So we were curious at Aperture to test this risk and resilience framework with our own tools. So during the 23-24 school year, we conducted a study to answer the question, can we predict middle school students' well-being through a risk and resilience framework? We chose middle school because I'm sure as many of you here today are aware, that's a particularly challenging time in a student's life. And we also wanted to see, if the use of student self-report measures would result in findings similar to what we just presented. A bulk of the research is really based on teacher-completed assessments, and we were seeking a way to build validity evidence for the use of our middle school student self-report measures. So the two main goals of our study were first to determine if the use of resilience and risk measures identified a unique group of students in need, and second, to determine whether the combined use of these screening tools grounded in the risk and resilience framework could help us predict students' well-being. So we recruited 270 students in grades 6 through 8, and we asked them to complete 3 different measures. First, the DESA Middle School Student Self-Report, which measures resilience factors, specifically social and emotional strengths. And then they also completed the Screener for Internalizing and Externalizing Risk. That's a 10-item assessment that reports as the name implies, internalizing and externalizing risk. And just to give you a little more context on that, the internalizing scale assesses emotions and behaviors like I am sad, I am lonely, that can really indicate much higher risk for mental health challenges. And then finally, they completed the Student Subjective Wellbeing Questionnaire. This is a 16-item assessment that measures students' positive emotions, relationships, their values or their meaning that they attach to things, and performance. So first, we looked at whether the DESA and the SEER, the internalizing externalizing scale, identified the same students as being at risk, or whether both measures were needed to identify all of the students with a potential concern. And we found that about 16% or 43 students in our sample had internalizing scores in the possible concern or concern range, even though their DESA scores were in the strength or typical range. We found the exact same number, 43 students had externalizing scores in the possible concern or concern range, even though their DESA scores were in the strength or typical range, right? So these students would fall in that symptomatic but content category, right? They have well-developed resilience, but they're experiencing some challenges. And in other words, we needed both tools to identify the full scope of students who needed some support. The combination of the two measures accurately predicted about 71% of students' well-being category, suggesting that the use of the combined, the risk and resilience measures really give us a good indication of students' well-being. But more importantly, they then give us actionable data for intervention, right? Additionally, this study used only student-completed measures, right? I want to really drive that point home because it's important. It's a time saver for schools, and it's also gives students agency in their development of these skills as well. So the fact that our findings are so consistent with other research that has been conducted along this line also suggests that we should have a lot of confidence in our student results.
Great. Thank you, Evelyn, for walking through those details for us. So we are now going to transition into what a risk and resilience approach means for practice. And the big picture here is that it's not enough to just screen for potential concerns. We need to focus on attending to emotional and behavioral risks proactively and on building social and emotional skills for all students. And it's only when we focus on both together that we can attain the goal of equipping our students to thrive. So this work of supporting students' well-being can be done through your existing MTSS system. As you can see highlighted on the screen by the blue boxes, we are going to be focusing here just on the Tier 1 level for the remainder of our time today. But of course, this work also needs to include supporting students at Tiers 2 and 3 as well. So the focus at Tier 1 is around building resilience through universal social and emotional skill development. And then it also involves screening for both social and emotional skills and for emotional and behavioral risk. And that's where we're going to start talking first. So again, when we think about using data to inform this work, we recommend using both strength-based measures to screen for resilience factors and using deficit-based measures to screen for risk factors. And to do this screening at the universal level to screen all students. So strength-based measures are really those measures that focus on positive skills and behaviors. And the use of strength-based measures offer a number of benefits. So they tend to be more acceptable to parents. They help to mitigate bias, and they also increase student engagement, both when students complete these measures themselves and when they're part of using that data and improving their own skills. And importantly, it's really that combination of strength and deficit-based measures that can really help identify the students who might benefit from more targeted supports. And that's really what the dual factor risk and resilience approach is about here. So once we identify these students with the screeners, we can use that data and use that information to inform what supports we can provide. So at the Tier 1 level, our goal of universal screening is to quickly and accurately identify both students' strengths and their concerns. And I'll talk about two measures that can be used to help accomplish that. Really, these are the measures that Evelyn introduced in her talking through the study that our team recently completed. So first, the DESA can be used to universally screen for social and emotional strengths. It's a strength-based measure, and it focuses on positive social and emotional behaviors related to resilience. In Evelyn's study, she talked about the student self-report, and so there is a version for students to complete, as well as a version that teachers can complete on students. When the DESA is used universally, it will provide baseline data about students' resilience factors and tell you which students would benefit from more social and emotional supports. And then the next measure in terms of risks, the SEER, which Evelyn also introduced a few minutes ago, the screener for internalizing and externalizing risks. The SEER is 10 items measuring internalizing and externalizing risks for students. And when this tool is used universally, it'll tell which students have concerns in each of those two domains. And then the real benefit comes from putting those two measures together, because it's providing a snapshot of each student's well-being. We can use that important information to inform the supports we provide to students, both supports to build students' resilience factors, as well as to prevent or address students' risk factors.
Thanks, Jen. That's a really great description of how the screening tools could be used within the MTSS framework, because we know so many districts, so many schools use that model to provide student services, right? So it's a familiar framework and a great look at how those screening tools will help integrate not just the academics and the behavior, but now also a focus on well-being, all within that MTSS model. We wanted to wrap up by looking at what practices and strategies can be put into place to support your students' well-being. We're going to start with what we call foundational practices. You might know them as daily practices or focusing on school climate, because we know that students' well-being is shaped not just by their own development, but by the environment in which they learn, right? If a student's experience is not positive or inclusive, or if they're in a chaotic setting, as I'm sure you can all relate or imagine, it's very difficult to experience or develop positive well-being, right? We're shaped by both within and environmental factors. So as school practitioners, I think it's really important to think about those day-to-day practices that can really help foster a positive, inclusive, and caring environment. So we identified we have a set of foundational practices in our system, and it's pretty extensive. And so what we did was we pulled a smaller subset of those foundational practices that we are calling our mental well-being practices set, right? And our practices are designed to do what I just described, right? Create that positive learning environment. And they include things like a reminder to greet your students every day, right, by their preferred name, pronounced correctly. And that's such a small thing, and yet in the busyness of our day-to-day, it can be really easy to forget how important it is to let a student know that we see them, we are grateful that they are here in our classroom today, and that we care about them, right? So just by standing at the door and a simple greeting can go a long way towards reminding the student that, like, I am paying attention to the fact that you are a part of this learning community. We know that having routines and rituals really helps students know what to expect and how the classroom operates. So again, you all know this. It's that taking away the guesswork in what I need to do or how I need to do it helps kids feel safe, and it allows them to put more mental energy and attention into their learning, right? So when the school operates well and there's clear expectations, it provides that safe environment that's so important to foster students' learning. Having clear expectations for behavior, goes hand in hand with that. Kids need to know, what those expectations are, and when they're not being followed, the follow-up and the feedback needs to happen very quickly, because what that does is remind everyone else what the expectations are, but it also keeps kids on track. It signals to them that you're there to help ensure that your learning environment is safe and is a safe place for them. And then finally, using inclusive language, especially in schools that are now serving newcomers and students who are increasingly diverse, especially when we look at the teacher demographics. And so making sure that our language is inclusive and positive. Again, all of these are simple practices, but it's so important to be intentional and to be consistent. And so some of the suggestions that we provide along with these practices are to really start with just focusing on a couple that are implemented across the school, right? Setting a goal for their implementation, a timeline, and sharing back the successes, challenges, any needed supports to get them in place, reflecting and adjusting as needed. What that does, again, the key is consistency, right? Not just about doing it every day within my classroom, but if the entire school follows these practices, just think about the impact that has, the positive impact that has on students. Our final recommendation is, select, once you have a couple in place, select additional ones when you're ready and repeat those steps. So our foundational practices, again, things we do every day to help create a positive environment. Those kinds of things help build students' resilience. We also need to explicitly teach the skills that have been associated with positive well-being. And these are 4 that are consistently identified in the research as being related to more positive well-being, right? So the first is self-awareness. And really more specifically within self-awareness, that ability to learn to identify emotions and thinking about how to regulate those emotions, that goes hand in hand with self-management there on the end. When students have the skills to do that, they are much better able to engage in more healthy and positive responses when they do encounter challenges or obstacles. Second, relationship skills, research across age levels and populations. So this goes well beyond the classroom, but we'll stay focused on schools for now. Consistently shows the power of having positive relationships, even if you just have a few, and how critical those relationships are for happiness, for reducing stress, and for your overall well-being. The good news is there are skills for students who have difficulty forming relationships. There are skills that we can teach to help promote more positive relationships. Optimistic thinking. This is a feature that's unique to the DESA, which is grounded in resilience theory. And the reason why we include it as a critical social emotional skill is because there is significant evidence that shows that optimistic thinking, or what you might also hear referred to as growth mindset or positive thinking or hopefulness, is another key skill that is highly associated with having a more positive outlook, more positive well-being, right? If you think about it, what optimistic thinking does is it gives students the belief that they have the ability to work through different situations. It also helps them keep things in perspective, right? They can think about, instead of like, why is this happening to me? What should I do? Having that mindset of, okay, I'm encountering a challenge. what are the things I need to do in order to navigate this well? And it's, again, key difference in helping students to build their agency and perseverance. And then finally, self-management, right? When we have a set of tools, or we teach students a set of tools that help guide their actions, to help inform their problem-solving skills and their coping skills, it makes it so much less likely that the student will engage in harmful behaviors. So we can explicitly teach those skills. And thanks, Jen. And so just like we did for our practices, we pulled a set of strategies aligned to those 4 areas that really focus on building these specific skills. So as you can see on the slide, we pulled two examples, things like teaching students positive self-talk, strategies for identifying and regulating your strong emotions. And the way we've structured our entire set of strategies, including those that we included in our mental well-being set, is they take from 10 to 30, 40 minutes. The time is included right at the top of the strategy, so you know if it will fit into the time that you have. We have provided the overall goal of the strategy, the why it works, and then outlined a set of really clear steps for putting that strategy into place, along with some suggested scripts, because we know it can be challenging sometimes to talk about these things. And so we have, it's not a required script that you have to follow, just some suggested ways that you can get these strategies into place. And then we've also included what materials you'll need to successfully put this strategy in place. Just like our foundational practices, consistency is important. And we know that students need to have the concepts introduced, but then they also need lots of opportunities to practice, right? And so setting an implementation goal, and then really being intentional about continuing to build on those opportunities for kids to practice what they're learning is going to be the key that helps them go from, I learned this in the class, to I can actually employ this strategy or this skill in the moment when I need it. And so again, like picking a couple to get started with, doing those consistently, not just in your own classroom, but across a grade or many grades or this school, it gives everyone a common set of language and a common set of tools. And what that does is then build understanding. So our time has really flown by, and I feel like we covered a lot of things. And so we thought it would be helpful to try and condense all of the information that we covered into just like 3 main takeaways. So first, we hope that what we have demonstrated here today is that the risk and resilience framework, we think, is such a powerful tool in thinking about how to support students' well-being, right? We know that strength-based approaches are very powerful, and at the same time, strength-based approaches sometimes miss those kids who really are struggling, right? And so that combination of risk and resilience together is a powerful way to really think about serving the needs of the whole student. We hope that we have demonstrated how risk and resilience data and instruction can be integrated into your MTSS system. If not, we're happy to take questions on that and speak a little more in detail about that. And finally, through our research on the DESA measures, we really want to leave you with that finding that the risk and resilience assessment, so again, that combination of tools, can really help you identify more students who probably need your support And then this is the key, also provides you with very actionable data that, that you can use to respond to their needs. So it goes beyond a score. You can look at the items, you can look at the specific skills and their scores across those various skills and competencies, and use that to inform, okay, where does this student need support? What is the nature of the support that they need, and how can I best provide it? So with that, we are open to taking any questions that you might have for us.
Thank you so much, Evelyn and Jen. We don't have any outstanding questions in the Q&A box. If anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to post them now. Otherwise, we thank you all for your time today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me, your Illinois DESA advisor, to learn more about the DESA and how a resilience and risk framework can support your district. We hope you have a great rest of the week and look forward to learning with you again soon.